Hey, friends. This is Martine Williams, and I am obsessed with all things mompreneur life and helping you to remix your priorities, your habits, your mindsets, and yes, even your relationships so that you can build a successful business without losing yourself in the process. I'm also obsessed with the color turquoise and lyrics of the 80s and 90s, but that's beside the point. Girlfriend, you don't have to hustle 24/7, 365 and continue to sacrifice your health, your relationships, and your sanity to be a successful mompreneur. As a small town girl living in a lonely world to a six-figure mompreneur, I am here to teach you how. There is a better way, and this podcast is your one-stop shop for all of the how-tos, the encouragement, the life hacks, the success tips, and of course, a little side of tough love. This is the Mompreneur Life Remixed podcast. So let's do this. Hey, friends, and welcome back to the Mompreneur Life Remixed podcast. Today's episode is episode number 21, and it is another Turquoise Talk episode edition. And today's guest is you're just going to fall in love with her as I did the very first time that I met her. Her name is Becca Johnson, and she is the president of Rooted You Consulting. The CEO and president of Rooted You Consulting is a business advisor, speaker, and author. She's an expert in optimizing personal and professional performance. Becca provides consulting services for corporate leadership teams, employees, CEOs, athletic organizations, and aspiring and established entrepreneurs through virtual and live experiences. If you ever get a chance to see her live, she is just an amazing speaker. As a certified dynametrics program professional, Becca uses a research-based personality and performance assessment tool, the PDP ProScan, to identify a person's innate strengths of personality and real-time functionality within their current life environments. That's a lot. The results from this assessment then provide a highly individualized framework for educating, equipping, and empowering her clients with customized personal growth strategies that maximize their professional performance and personal fulfillment. This trademark process creates mental and emotional breakthroughs that are then linked with specific practical strategies and tactics to launch people from average to elite and surviving to thriving. Average to elite and surviving to thriving. A sought-after speaker and trainer for businesses and groups, Becca also enjoys traveling the globe, teaching and training individuals and teams to dynamically develop and more effectively harness and enhance their unique talents and strengths. She has guided countless individuals, organizations to increase morale, fulfillment, and bottom line results. Becca also created a customized personal and professional mentorship program, Rooted You University. This online school offers a variety of growth experiences for aspiring and established entrepreneurs and corporate employees, and is quickly becoming the most trusted and respected online school for personal and professional development. Becca lives in Meridian, Idaho, with her husband, Dr. Ryan Johnson, two children, Bridger and Brooke, and a pup, Maui, who is super cute. If you follow her on social media, you'll see him. He's underneath her feet every day at her desk. She was born and raised in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., as a former Division I collegiate athlete, public school teacher, turned entrepreneur, and now CEO, business consultant, author, and public speaker. Through everything she's done and continues to do, Becca's professional purpose statement is to mentor all those she works with to identify and then fulfill their own purposes by staying rooted in exactly who they are so they can do what they were created to do with joy. Y'all, that was a lot. And she is just simply amazing. And I know you may be thinking, oh my goodness, it's another one of those people who talk about personality test. And I get it, because I was that way. When I first was introduced to her, I'm like, oh, I've done all of them, right? But I will say this is the first one that I feel like I was able to walk away with so much valuable information and such a better understanding of who I am, who I've been becoming, why I feel stressed at certain times. And it's just been so eye-opening. So much so that I'm even looking into being certified myself, because I just know this is a great tool that is helping so many people and has helped me already. So without further ado, I hope you have your pen and paper ready. And honestly, I think we're going to have to do another episode with Becca because she has so much to offer. But let's get started with Ms. Becca Johnson. Welcome back, everybody, to the Mompreneur Life Remixed podcast. Today's episode is going to be another one of our Turquoise Talk episodes where I interview another mompreneur. And I say this at the beginning of every episode that I'm excited for the episode, but I really am, because I try really hard to make the episodes not a waste of your time, like an opportunity for you to take 20, 30 minutes to really learn something new, to be inspired, to be empowered, whatever you're coming to this podcast for. And so I am equally excited every episode, especially the Turquoise Talk ones, because I just love learning more about other mompreneurs, and I love hearing how their days are run, love hearing their stories, how they became a mompreneur. So Becca Johnson is my guest today, and she is the founder and president of Rooted You Consulting. And we have just gotten to know each other over the last couple of months, and I just love you to pieces. Like, you're just the real deal, and your smile is contagious. If y'all could see her on the screen right now, like, we're both just kind of smiling at each other. We had some really fun chatter before we started this episode. But Becca, thank you so much for being willing to come on the show and share with my audience.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love podcasts. I have a podcast. I have not recorded an episode in over a year, but it really is such a blessing to be here. And it's been a joy getting to know you over the last few months. And I'm just really honored to serve you and your community.
Well, thank you. So tell us a little bit about you, your family, kind of how you became a mompreneur.
Yeah, well, geez, how far do we want to roll this back? Well, let's go back a little ways, just because I think that in sharing story, we can really inspire people and relate well with people. Obviously, our stories don't, meet everyone eye to eye, but I think we can all learn from stories. So taking it back, I graduated college and became a public school physical education and health teacher. And 6-7 years into that, had my son, Bridger. And as any mom knows, my reason quickly began to change. I was at that place in my life of, oh my gosh, I have this responsibility of raising this child. Do I really want to be teaching in the schools, sending him to daycare? How do I want that to look? And so at that point in my life, I just started really contemplating, what is this next step for me? And I think so many moms get to that place at various seasons in our lives, whether it's the birth of a child, children leaving the house, going off to college, eventually becoming a grandparent, which I'm not there yet, thank goodness, but it's coming.
Yes.
Of kind of saying, like, who am I now? Who am I now? And that's where my entrepreneurial journey actually began. I went back to school after Bridger was born to get a master's in health promotion, knowing full well that it was just going to hopefully propel me into what was next, what God was calling me into. And halfway through my master's degree, got pregnant with my daughter. And then at that point in time, really realized that I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom with my kids. And so I launched my first company, which was Performance Kids. And it was sports and fitness for preschoolers. And it was perfect because it fit all the boxes of who I was. I loved fitness. I loved health. I loved children. I had little kids. I had preschoolers. So I took all my passions and what I was really good at, which was teaching and speaking and all of those things that I was passionate about in health and wellness. And I started my first business. And that was almost, my son now is 14 and he was 18 months when I started that. So that was that you can do the math. And I'm not a math teacher.
I'm not either.
But that was my first business. And so I did that. And I did that for 8 years. I expanded and grew that business. I learned a lot along the way, which we can talk about as we go in this, along with this conversation. But that was my first introduction to entrepreneurship. That business ended up growing into 3 states. I tell my husband to this day, if I wouldn't have pivoted out of that, it would probably be in every state at this point in time. But God had a different calling on my life. And that kind of leads me to about a decade ago where my husband and I decided to partner in our own entrepreneurial adventure together. He had partnered with a health and well-being company in the arena of direct sales network marketing. And my kids had aged out of my company. They were no longer preschoolers. I was finding myself, my passions were shifting a little bit. And I always held on to that company, which is a good thing that I did because we just recently launched it here in Boise, Idaho, where I live now. But that transitioned me into a decade of entrepreneurship on a whole new level. I always tell people entrepreneurship, you can really put it in 2 categories. Entrepreneurship is different than solopreneurship. Solopreneurship is you're building a business on your own. That's what Performance Kids was. I was in charge. I wasn't really building a team. I had amazing teachers, but it was such a small handful of them. There was like 10 at any given time. So it was very, very small. So to some degree, that solopreneurship fit me really, really well. It fit the essence of who I was. When we started building and spent a decade building our network marketing business in health and well-being, and I partnered with my husband, that was entrepreneurship. That was very, very different. That was learning leadership on a whole new level, leading teams of people. As a matter of fact, tens of thousands of people. We were really blessed by being in that industry and still are. My husband still is in that industry to this day. But that's kind of where my path and the trajectory took me. And then 5 years into that, so now we're going from like me sitting here with you right now, back 5 years, is when God really placed upon my heart this new desire to serve all people, whether they were entrepreneurs or working in corporate organizations, to help them harness their personality to optimize their performance. I was blessed to grow up in a home of 2 loving parents. My mom, Dr. Lynn Owens, had been devoted 30 years of her career into understanding what makes people tick. Where do their strengths lie? How do you take strengths so that you can help people live in them to be successful? And so 5 years ago, after being an entrepreneur for so long, serving so many people, working with so many people, I knew what was missing in entrepreneurship. And that kind of catapulted me into the creation of Rooted You Consulting, where now my full-time work is actually doing that work where I go into organizations or I work with entrepreneurs, everything from one-on-one to big companies and organizations. And I just help magnify the strengths of the people, of the teams, so that they can optimize their performance in life and work. So that's where I am today with Rooted You Consulting.
What a journey.
Yeah.
I mean, what a journey. And I'm sure, all throughout that journey, whether it was when you were, like you said, kind of the solopreneur and now, then into entrepreneurship and now you're doing a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's been some lessons or pivotal moments in that journey. Can you think of one right now? Like what was your biggest kind of turning point or lesson that you've had along that amazing journey that you have?
Yeah. And I think what I'm going to share with you will speak to a lot of entrepreneurs. And actually, transparently, this is something that's not talked about very much in our space of entrepreneurship or solopreneurship. But 5 years into building my network marketing business alongside my husband, and don't get me wrong, there were so many blessings and I learned so much. And I had on my mind this millionaire mindset, which anyone that gets into direct sales or network marketing, or even if it's a little bit, like for us, it was a lot, right? That was our full-time work for a decade. But even if it's a little bit, you get propelled into the world of personal and professional development. You start being inundated with messages of, if you want to get where you want to go, you need to grow. And so then you start hearing about authors and reading books and podcasts, and they're all great. And there's so many blessings that can flow from them. But what happened for me, I ended up reading more books in 5 years than I did probably my whole life. I was never a reader until I got into that, arena. And I started like soaking and absorbing all of this information. And I started believing what actually were lies. I started believing I needed to become someone in order to be successful. And I believed that I could, because these authors or these speakers, whether it was someone on stage at a huge event like Tony Robbins and nothing against these people, I think you can all learn from them. But I know now looking back, you have to be so armored and so incredibly careful. But 5 years into my journey of building that company with my husband, and in 4 years, we had turned a millionaire, and that was a huge goal, and it was so good. But I didn't like who I had become. And that changed everything for me, because I knew that if I was struggling with not liking who I had become and feeling like I had actually become someone that God did not want me to become.
Right.
How many other women were struggling with that? And I think men too. I'd say women, because obviously I work more with women than men.
Right.
Unless I'm doing corporate work with Rooted You Consulting, but sort of asking myself, like, man, if I'm struggling with this, how many other people are? And that 5-year mark within that career is really what caused me to dive into what's missing. Why is it? Because then my eyes were really open. I'm like, if I'm not liking who I became, how many other people really are? And I started just asking the question.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that so many women were struggling with this. Like, I feel like I have to be someone. I'm trying to become someone. I don't like it. It doesn't feel right, but I'm pushing hard. And so I'm like, okay, obviously this is common.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not alone in this, but what's really, really missing? And
right.
what I realized was missing is that, all these speakers and all these authors and all of these, things that you're reading or listening to are spoken or written from the perspective of what works for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you read Brendan Burchard's book,
Love him. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Say, great book. But what you have to understand is that book was written because what he talks about in there worked for him.
Right.
Right. So we pick up the book and we read it and we're like, oh, this is going to be great. Transform my life. Like, I'm going to learn all the habits I need and I'm going to build this massively successful business. I'm going to have joy in doing so, everything that's talked about. But what happens if you read that book and then it doesn't work? Well, the first thing we think of is, what the heck is wrong with me? What's wrong with me that I can't do what he's saying?
Right.
And that's just one example, right? You could think of any author. I have books behind me if you're seeing this video later, and we have a whole other bookshelf full of books of all personal professional development. And some of them you can read and you might take something like, oh, that works for me. That resonates. That's great. And then other things don't. But the reason that it doesn't work is because I'm not that person that wrote that book. You're not that person. Right.
Right.
But nobody's saying that. Everyone's saying, just do this. It's going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I started saying, okay, how do I take the wisdom and knowledge that I have based on all of my life experiences from being an elite college athlete to becoming a teacher, to becoming an entrepreneur, to then consulting, with literally billionaire business owners, okay,
Mm-hmm.
consulting
Mm-hmm.
with them, taking all this thing that I knew, what's missing? And the one thing that was missing was what I use as a foundation for all of my work in Rooted You Consulting. And that's what it's called, the Pro Scan.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where Dr. Lynn Owens, who I'm so blessed to have her as my mom, came in, because for 30 years of her research, I heard her talking about the importance of understanding and knowing in full confidence who God created you to be. Where do those strengths lie? And this is different than any other type of assessment out there. And we can talk about that. But if you don't understand that, then everything, you'll be made to believe that there's something wrong with you. And if you don't have that solid foundation in all that you do, you'll start becoming someone that you're not. Right. And I think that's the worst thing that can happen to any person, is because I lived it. I know what it feels like, is that in the process of doing what you believe God called you to do or created you to do, you become someone that he doesn't want you to be.
Right.
And I just think it's happening to so many women. And so that's where all of my work is rooted in harnessing the strengths and of who God created you to be, creating that foundation so that you can go. So then you can read the books, you can listen to the podcast, but you have a filter.
Right.
That might work for me or that might not. Or what does that mean for me in my life right now?
Right. That's such good perspective, because I am a reader too. I mean, you can't see it now because my office is still a mess from the move, but I have books in boxes. I mean, just tons of books in boxes. And it is just like our natural inclination to be like, what's wrong with me? Everybody loves this book and everybody loves this method and it's working for them and it's not working for me. And I do think it's common. I've seen it, being in the industry as well for 15 years, just seeing women just lose themselves in the process, in the pursuit of that success. And some of the things that you were just talking about really helps women to understand, or hopefully it's going to help listeners to understand, that that's what leads to burnout as well, is when you're constantly trying to become someone that you're not, or you become someone and, you're stretching yourself out of your talents and your gifts, and it leads to burnout. Would you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And we actually have the science and the research to back exactly what you're saying. So when we live in the strengths of who we are, which this tool that I use, the Pro Scan, I use it with every single person I work with, whether it's a one-on-one or a company of 500 people. Everyone goes through the Pro Scan, because when you can see the Pro Scan and you can see where someone's strengths lie and the magnitude of how much that strength is present in their life. But then what's powerful is that you can actually see the stretch. And that's what we call priority environment in this work. And stretch is also stress. And so Martine, because I did this with you, when you can see how far you're being pulled, and the Pro Scan will show this in the report, how far you are being pulled outside of your natural strengths in order to accomplish tasks. And I'll pause for a minute because stress isn't always a bad thing. If we like the results that we get from that pull, from that stretching, from that stress, then we'll be motivated to do it. But let's just talk the opposite of that for a minute.
Right.
If there's a mom that's listening to this and you're trying to build a business and every day you are pulled so far outside of your natural essence, that's what I call your strengths, right? Your strengths of personality. If you're pulled so far outside that because you feel like you need to do that in order to be successful, that equivalates to energy drain. That stress is energy, right? It's good stress if it energizes you through the stress. It's distress or bad stress if it drains you from the stretch, right? And so I see it all the time. People becoming someone that they're not naturally. You see the stretch. And then this is my first question. Do you like your results? 90% of the time when I'm working with somebody, to some degree, they'll say, I don't like the results. That's what leads to burnout.
Right.
Because you are literally so drained, in so much distress all the time from feeling like you have to be or become someone that's outside of those strengths, and you're not seeing the results that you want, you'll burn out. So then we have to say, well, what do we need to do? What do you need to do to get back into your strengths so that you get the results that you want? Because the minute you get back into your strengths, you instantaneously, you start to feel energized.
Energy. Yeah.
Instant. You're like, this is fun. I feel joy. It's easy. There's flow. Now, the other point that I have to say is we can't all live in our strengths all day long, all the time.
Right.
You know, as moms, we're always having to stretch, right? We're always having to become. I mean, I have to become less dominant in my natural essence every day in order to support my kids.
Right.
I'm blowing out of the water, right? That's a whole other podcast.
I know. We'll have to come. Yeah, we'll bring you back on to talk about some parenting.
But we're always having to become. We're always having to stretch. But if you don't understand and have clarity and confidence in the foundation of who God created you to be right now in real time and what that looks like, then you're guessing and you're thinking, okay, well, this isn't, how much talk is there in personal and professional development about getting uncomfortable? Let me be the person to tell you right now that that's not always a good thing.
Right.
Especially if it's consistently over time and not getting the results. And then, you know, in lieu of what of your point and what you're so passionate about is saving moms from burnout.
Right.
We can't do it unless we have a solid foundation from the get-go,
from
the beginning. And that's what I knew was missing.
That's
Martine, that's what's missing in all of personal and professional development. Nobody has a foundational starting point.
Right.
That's unique to who they are.
Right.
Not unique to me and who I am, but unique to each person. So that's why I'm so passionate about my work, create that foundation for people so they can see, because it propels them for everything moving forward.
Well, and we just don't take the time to slow down and figure these things out either. We just follow the pace of society, which is hustle, work harder, you know, be like her, be like him, and to really slow down, whether it's the pro scan or whatever it is, and really just sit with yourself for a minute and figure out, first of all, you know, what do I really want? And what is God calling me to? And what are my gifts? Because I spent a lot of time, not now, but I did on my 15-year journey of comparing myself to someone who has completely different gifts, you know, and I thought, well, I have to be like her if I'm going to get there. Right. And I've had people probably say that about me. I have to be like Martine to get to where I want to be. And we all get there using the strengths that we have, but most people don't slow down long enough to even identify those strengths and learn to play in those strengths, and then figure out what they really want and use those strengths to go after it. They just kind of follow the norm, you know, follow the pace that everybody else is doing.
Yeah. And you have to be so careful. I mean, I think that we're not intentionally really, really thinking about the magnitude of consequences that will result if you're not so careful of where you're getting the information that you're beginning to identify who you are with.
Right.
And that's so important that I say that, because the pro scan is an assessment of personality. And a lot of people roll their eyes at that kind of thing because there's so many things out there, right?
Right. Yes.
You can go to Google and you can like Google, like, what's my personality? And you'll find everything from strength finders to DISC to Enneagram to what's your animal. Like, it's ridiculous. Colors, like all these things. I know you're laughing, but because you know it's right.
Well, it is. And when the first time I met you or when I got the email that, we were going to be working with you, I'm like, oh, it's another one of those person. I mean, that was my initial thing. And I've not been someone who's really gotten into those. But this was different. It was definitely very different.
Yeah. And what I want to say to that point, and what I really want anyone that's listening to this to understand, is that to some degree, before I was really focused on the pro scan, I was looking at every other thing out there, actually trying to prove the pro scan wrong, because why? I'm my mother's daughter, and I'm like,
right.
There's something wrong about this. It's just my stubbornness. And you can learn something from all of them: strength finders, not discs, it's Enneagram, all of them. But the problem is that they'll lump you into a box. Strength finders, for example, will put you in a box of like 34 types. Okay, so then they'll say, well, you're 5 of these 34 types with millions of other people. Same thing with Enneagram, like 1 of 9, 2 of 9, with all the wings, all the things.
Right.
I don't even understand it. But that's okay.
Right.
I don't need to understand it because I wasn't called to utilize that tool.
Right.
But I want people to be really, really careful, because here's a perfect example. You and I would be lumped into extroversion, okay? Any personality assessment looks at 4 cornerstone traits. They might call it something else, but there's basically 4 cornerstone traits. Dominance, which is a take charge trait, extroversion, which is a people trait, pace, which is a patience trait, and conformity, which is a systems trait. They all, everything out there to some degree talks about each of those. They might call it something else, but that's the bottom line. And that's behavioral science if you study it.
Right.
So I'll use you and I as an example. Okay. We both have extroversion above the midline. In the pro scan, we measure everything from the midline. So you and I, even though we're above the midline, any other assessment would put us in a box with millions of other people that say, oh, there's our high extrovert people.
Right.
But you and I might look at each other and we might go, yeah, we have high extroversion, but we're actually very, very different.
Right. Yeah.
Nothing on the planet, nothing except this that I'd use. Nothing on the planet measures the degree to which that trait is present in your life.
Right.
And when we can understand the amplitude to which that trait is present in our life, that becomes as unique to you as your fingerprints, rather than putting you in a box with millions of other people. I mean, you've done them before, and you're like, okay, it's saying that I'm ENFPJ, but I'm looking at that, I'm like, but I'm not like them, or
right, yeah, that totally. I mean, when someone said their number, I'm like, yeah, but we are so different. How can we be the same number?
Yeah, nothing is as unique to you as your fingerprints. And this is. And when people can see that and understand that, we can begin to predict behavior. We can begin to predict communication styles, how people lead, their backup style, satisfaction, like all of those things. So back to my point, if you are listening to this podcast and you are passionate about personal and professional development, which I hope that you are, because I believe that all people should want to become the best version of who God created them to be.
Right.
Like, I think what a sad thing if we get to the end of our life and we didn't become who God created us to be.
Right.
But at risk of becoming someone that you're not is something to be so intentionally aware of, because what's at stake, right? And what's at stake if you're just, not really spending the time to protect who you are, right? And really looking at resources that are valid, that are reliable, that aren't going to cause you to think that there's something wrong with you, all of those things, that we've kind of already addressed. Then what's at stake is that you won't fulfill your purposes by becoming who God created you to become. You'll become someone else. And just be really, really, really careful. And I'm very passionate about that message because there's so much in the space of entrepreneurship, of mompreneurship, that, you can really wreck yourself if you don't. Yourself. You need to be very, very careful.
I think that's the name of the episode that's coming out this week, is check yourself before you wreck yourself. That's so funny that you brought that up. There's just so much freedom. I know for me, just my personal experience that I've had, with you and the pro scan was just so many light bulb moments of, oh, that's why, I feel that way, or that's why I act that way, or that's why, for example, I have a big energy tank, right? So that's why when people say, Martine, how do you do it all? Well, I have a bigger energy tank, but I have been so guilty of not really judging, so I'm not a judgmental person, but being like, why can't they do what I do? Right.
Yep.
And so it just, not everybody has the same energy tank, and not everybody, but you feel so guilty if you're the person that's looking at me who does a lot of things. I don't do everything. I'm very good at delegating. So it may appear that I'm doing all of those things, but for the person who's listening and maybe you're looking at me, or maybe there's someone else you're following on social media, you see all the things that they do and you're wondering like, why can't I do those things? Or what's wrong with me? There's so much freedom in seeing it in print on that 25-page document that prints out from ProScan.
Yeah,
and then to spend time with someone like Becca to really help you process through. I mean, I'm still thinking about it. I'm still processing those things, and just it being in real time. You know, when I took it, I was coming out of COVID. We were getting ready to move. And so there were a lot of things that factored into my results, but the freedom, you know, I just want people to know when you take the time to really evaluate what your strengths are and do the ProScan, it just shows you so much about yourself that you didn't even realize, or that you've been trying to explain away.
Yes.
You know?
It will give people peace. And
yes.
It does that every time. It allows people to kind of take a deep breath and go, oh, this makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this makes sense. And this is good. Everything about the ProScan is good.
Right.
Sure, it will reveal stretch, you know, and it will reveal distress, but it's okay. It's that piece of knowing that there's nothing wrong with you, that there are solutions that can help mitigate that stress. And we get right into action of making sure that happens from the minute. And, you know, for you, it was big because you were in the midst of moving, and I'll shed a little light into your audience. So Martine has very high patience. Her pace trait is her highest speed. Actually, your extroversion might be a little bit higher, but you have pace very, very high. In other words, she thrives in harmony, okay, on a harmonious environment of consistency and steady. And that's really, really important. And so when I worked with you prior to that move, I said, listen, you need to hit pause on everything because your entire environment is about to blow up and disrupt. And you're going to feel massive stretch, okay? I mean, that red line, which on the ProScan, that part of the graph is red, was dialing way down, feeling the need to like move really fast and no structure and lots of uncertainty. And for someone like you, that's high pace, you needed permission you needed permission from me to say, it's okay to say no to everything else right now, because of how much this is going to drain you.
Right.
You know, and that awareness just gives so much peace and lets people know like, okay, this is what I need to do right now. Because here's the bottom line. Again, I always go back to this question, what's at stake? If we're not our best self as moms, as wives, if you're listening to this, if you're not married, as women, like anyone can take this phrase and apply it to their life. But if we're not our best self, how can we expect to take care of others? Right. Which is, we're all naturally wired to serve other people. And so anyways, I was very proud of you because I know that you hit pause and you do have a really, really big plate, which it can be challenging because you want to do a lot of things. But it was all the move stuff that just really consumed you for that month, which you did a really, really good job of managing that.
Well, thanks. Thank you for giving me the permission. Because it just like the weight just kind of came off my shoulders. Like, you know, the rest of my responsibilities were not going to completely fall apart if I took that pause, you know. And I think that's the lie we believe a lot of times as women is if we pause and, you know, do something for ourselves, you know, for self-care, or if we put pause on that project to work on this in this moment, like our priorities change and they shift. And that doesn't mean that you're less of a mom or less of a business owner when you make those shifts. And so I just appreciate the permission, because even though I teach it and preach it, it felt good for someone to tell me it's okay.
We all need a dose of our own medicine.
We do. It's easy to teach, not always easy to put into practice for yourself. So I would love to know if you have experienced burnout before, and if you have, kind of, how did it feel for you? Because I know some people, it's different, you know, it shows up different for different women. So I'm just curious, have you experienced it? What did it feel like? And about how long do you feel like you were there? What did you do to come out of it? That's lots of different questions. So I can repeat some of those if you,
that's
need
okay.
me to, but
yeah, I mean, I think when I look back on my journey of, you know, even from, let's start being a collegiate athlete, you know, let's just start there. And I look back over, I mean, I'm 40 now, so that's 20 years, over 20 years of all those things that I've done and the seasons that have come and gone. I can absolutely say with full certainty that through each of those seasons of collegiate athlete to career, to becoming a mom, to launching my first company, to building a second company, to building a third, to now Rooted You, there's always been moments of burnout. And I actually, like, I don't know how many people would say this, but I will. I keep things very real. I don't necessarily know that burnout is 100% preventable. I'm a big faith-filled person, and I believe that God will call us into that if we stop leaning on him.
Right.
It's like his way. And this is how I feel. Why? Because I know when I've gone through those times of burnout, I've grown closer in my relationship with the Lord than any other time in my life.
Amen.
So I think for me, the burnout was like, hey, listen, Beck, you're not in control. I'm going to burn you out. Right. Like obviously I can choose.
Right.
And I was choosing things that were leading to the burnout for sure. But looking back, I know why it happened. And I'm grateful for those times because without them, I wouldn't have furthered my relationship with God. I wouldn't have gotten rerouted in what he says, right? And what the Bible says. And so that's perhaps a perspective on burnout that you don't hear very frequently. But I also do know that burnout, when I look at and the choices that I was making during those times, it was all things that were pulling me outside of doing what I really, really love. It was saying yes to too many things because I felt obligated to do too many things, or it was a season where there was just a ton of things going on and it was just unpreventable. I will say, as much as I learned in it, and when I was in those moments, it was as equally as challenging to stop and slow down.
Yeah, for sure.
As it was to keep going. Like, it would have actually, for me, blow right through it. Feeling burnout.
Yeah.
I got this. I'm going to put on my armor. I'm just going to blow right through this and everything's going to be fine. And those were the hardest times. Like if you're feeling that in your life right now, as hard as that is, because you feel so much responsibility, you might feel so much weight, you might feel like you have to do all these things, you might have bills to pay. I don't know what's causing that. I cannot emphasize enough. Stop, pause, do something, because it's just inevitable that it will completely leave you flat on your face. And again, looking back, I'm really thankful for those times because it's my reminder from God of like, I'm in control here. You're not. Slow down.
Right.
What's most important. And looking forward, it's going to happen again. Like
For sure.
There's always something new, right? There's always a new season. There's always a new reason. There's always something different. So, but again, when you're rooted in one faith, I firmly believe, and what's true, which all comes from the Bible, you don't need to go anywhere else to get any wisdom. Like just get in the Word of God. Okay. There's a lot of things, just open the Bible. But when you're rooted in that, and then in this work that I do with Rooted You Consulting and who he created you to be, it can just give you that foundation to sustain and come out of those times of burnout.
Well, because our default is to go faster. Our default is to just keep chasing the ball, thinking we're going to catch it. And the ball just keeps going faster. There's just more things, that come. So I've always said, I need more accountability to slow down than I do to get to work. Like, I'm not someone you have to say, hey, Martine, get to work. Like, that's just, that because you can see my pro scan, but that's just how I'm wired. And so it did until God took me through like burnout seasons, like you said, that I realized, 2021 has been, I've had a lot of personal injuries. And so I didn't love them. They were physically painful, but more emotionally painful than I realized, and very unexpected. But, God showed me a lot of things through that slowdown. It was basically like, I'm slowing you down because you're going way too fast.
Yeah.
And then he brought you in my life and brought the pro scan. And so it's just been, like you said, I can look back on this year and just say, wow, it was tough. It's been rough, but God has brought me through it. And I'm thankful because I've learned so much about myself this year. And, my faith has just really, really grown. So I agree. Those seasons we need those seasons. We definitely need it.
Yeah. And they're going to come. It's
you can't, but how you respond to them each time, is the key. So of all your accomplishments, what would you say you're most proud of?
Oh, my kids for sure.
Looking like a true mom.
Listen, the hardest job hands down is
Amen. Amen.
We have a hard enough time raising ourselves. So let's talk about raising another human being.
Right.
Yeah, no. And it's so interesting because at this season in my life right now, I still have a ton of things going on. I brought back Performance Kids to the Treasure Valley. So essentially I'm building 2 new businesses and 2 new companies, and it looks different, but there is a lot going on. But I find myself so frequently saying, could I pause all of it right now? Because in 4 years, my son will be in college. He's a freshman in high school. In 6, my daughter's going to be gone. Could I pause right now on all of it just to be fully present when I need to be with my kids? Now, knowing me and who I am, that actually I wouldn't be well. I wouldn't be well. I was never that mom who was like, okay, I said I wanted to be full-time mom. What I didn't say is that 6 months into that, I was dying. I'm like, I am the worst full-time mom.
It sounds good coming out of our mouth until we have to implement, and then we're like, what?
So as soon as my kids were old enough to be in preschool, they went to preschool part-time. That's when I launched Performance Kids. There's so much guilt that we put upon ourselves for how we raise our kids. And learning, over the course of, the last 14 years, which, listen, it's not that much. I seek wisdom from women much older than me on all of this, but just letting that go and knowing that I'm doing the best I can with what I know right now. Until I know better, I'll do better.
Right.
But my kids are, they're healthy. They're getting good grades. They're doing well. I know it won't always be that, but I think that's just my greatest accomplishment. It's just, listen, they're still here and they're doing okay. So,
Well, you brought up mom guilt, and that is such a huge challenge. And to me, it's kind of like burnout. It comes and goes, right? It's not ever not present, just at deeper levels, I feel like, because we care, right? And we care when we love big for our kids. But that's definitely something that I see in my coaching clients and the women that I lead is the mom guilt. So, what would you say helps you the most with curbing or kicking that guilt to the curb?
Yeah, 100%. You don't make it about you.
Yeah.
So anytime we feel any sense of guilt, it's because we're self-reflecting, right? And it's interesting because in the personal and professional development space, it's a lot about self-reflection. But to some degree, like, it's important to get confident in who God says that you are and who He created you to be, so you can do what He created you to do. But too much self-reflection can be really detrimental to your overall well-being. And as a matter of fact, the Bible will speak of don't reflect on yourself, cast your reflection on others, right? It's make it about other people, serve others. And so anytime I feel guilty, I just take the attention off of myself, because it's all usually like, what's wrong with me? Why am I this way? What am I doing wrong? What am, all me. And I stop that mindset and I say, what do my kids see through this, right? What am I doing for my kids? What am I doing for my husband? How are they perceiving what I'm doing? What am I teaching them through this? And so you just got to take the focus off of yourself.
Right.
And
get out of self and into service. I heard someone say that the other day, and I've loved that. I've just chewed on that for a long time. Just get out of self and into service immediately changes things.
Instantly. And that goes not just with guilt, but anything. You're in a slump, you're in a funk, you're in, any time you feel that you're doubting, you're anything like that, it's because you're self-focused. When the minute you change your focus to service of others, it changes everything. Every day I wake up and I essentially say 2 things. Lord, guide me today to fulfill my purposes, to serve who you created me to serve. Right. And then the second thing is, what's at stake if I don't do that?
Right.
And every day looks different. Some days it's, more things with my kids. And then other days it's less. It's more work focused. There's no one right way. I will say this, and not everyone struggles with this to the extent that I do, but social media wrecked me. It wrecked me. I spent a decade building a business on social media that generated millions of dollars.
Right.
Hear me when I tell you, it wrecked me. A lot of when I got to that 5-year mark and not liking who I had become came from so much of that. And I have a natural essence of very, very high extroversion, which leads to a lot of care, which leads to a lot of comparison naturally. So for me, I could open up one thing, see what someone else was doing, see how another mom was raising her kids or doing a holiday celebration or doing a craft or like playing or whatever. And I'm like, what the heck is wrong with me that I don't like sitting on the floor doing crafts with my kids? I'm like, and so it really, really did wreck me. And if you follow me at all on social media anymore, I'm pretty much not even on there. I'm in stories on Instagram, maybe make a post once every couple months.
Right.
It's just, and what was at stake, right? That's the question, like what's at stake? I knew that if I didn't remove myself from that environment, I was just going to continue to downward spiral and get into that mindset of like self-focus.
Right.
It's the most ego-centric platform on the planet. Everything is about you. Everything is about that person.
Right.
And I didn't want to be that anymore. So I had to remove it. So I took it off my phone. Instagram's on my phone, but Facebook's not. And so you just have to really, again, intentionality is critically important. And you have to decide like what's at stake if you don't. The other thing that was at stake is me saying, am I going to potentially lose business? Yeah. Yes.
Right. But what's the cost, right? Like you say,
I was okay with that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to lose myself again in the process.
Right. That's such a huge message. I hope, I pray that the ears that are hearing this podcast those two questions are so key. And, if it's not getting you closer to not just the goal, but the call on your life and you using those gifts to do what God's called you to do, then it's taking you further away. And I mean, it totally is. And like you said, wrecking yourself in the process. And so while the decisions you make may go against what everybody else is doing, if it's right for you, it's right for you. And I think that's the hard decision to make, but you have us here to support you and to cheer you on because that's what you need to do. If that's what you need to do, that's what God's calling you to do.
Yeah,
Don't just do.
It could be just for a time.
Right. It's not all or nothing.
So different. Yep. Everyone is so different. So just be really, really careful. But if you're listening to this and you feel that you're doing things, let's just talk to the mompreneur that's building a business from home. If you feel like you're doing things throughout your day that are leading to lack of joy, that are causing you to question, that are causing frustration, that are causing doubt, that are causing uncertainty, that are making you feel like there's something wrong with you, you can stop doing those things.
Right.
You have permission to not do those things. Now, the challenge is a lot of these women have leaders that are asking them to do those things.
Right.
They'll get an accountability group to build their business. They're like, you got to make 10 posts today, or you got to follow up with 5 people, or you got to do this, or you got to get to this event, or you got to do all these things. And so you have leadership. They don't know what they don't know.
Right.
But that's what worked for them, that have an expectation of, what you need to do. And I think here's one thing I will say. You don't really know if you don't try, right? So there's nothing wrong with trying things, and give yourself enough time to see if it works. But over the long haul, if you don't like what it's doing to you, then just stop doing it. And find another way that works for you.
Right.
And who God created you to be, without feeling like you have to do it how that person is doing it.
Well, and that's the beauty of the Pro Scan, being able to know what those things are and how to harness, like you say, your strengths to maximize your performance. I did have one more question about that with the Pro Scan. So how often do you recommend that people do the Pro Scan to kind of check in with themselves?
That's such a great question. So I say twice a year, generally, every 6 months, because people are always changing. Environments are always changing. Seasons are always changing. Relationships come, relationships go. Stress doesn't just come from you building your business as a mompreneur.
Right.
Stress can come from health issues, financial issues, faith issues, could be work issues, right? Stress comes from all areas of our life. So what you're dealing with in real time at any given time, we can see it and we can address it. It's kind of like getting the oil changed in your car. It's like that tune-up of rerouting you and reminding you of like, oh yeah, this is where my strengths lie. And this is why I'm feeling the way I am right now, because this is what's going on. Here's the other thing I will tell you, and I see this a lot with entrepreneurs. Your natural strengths of who you are pretty much hardwired by the age of 35 due to combination of nature and nurture. And I'm not going to get into the science of that right now. But I will say for entrepreneurs, we do see those strengths of personality. They can potentially change in the becoming process over, when there are big life changes, like becoming an entrepreneur,
Right.
you start to become, right? And becoming isn't always a bad thing. I really want the listeners to hear this. My story was a bad thing because I didn't like who I had become. But if I work with a client and we see some shifting in their strengths over the course of, 6 months or a year or 2 years, and my best clients, it's like indefinitely forever until I'm breathing, and they are. But if we see change in their natural essence and they say, this is good, then that's a good thing.
Right.
I was just recently working with a principal. I work with a lot of teachers. I just have a heart for teachers and what they do, and being a former teacher. And I was working with a principal. When she first took the pro scan, she naturally registered her dominance way lower than what she believed herself to be. And in working with her, we realized that she had become that because she felt like she needed to become that for all of her teachers. It was this more supportive type of essence. And when we took it again, and that it was just in a 3-month time, dominance rose on that pro scan. And she goes, this is who I am. And the joy and the release of all of this pressure that she had carried for years, 8 years as a principal, of feeling she had to be this dominance below the midline to be that person for her teachers. And she had become that in 3 months. And she is a totally different person. She has so much more joy going into her school building every day. And she's thriving. She was dying before. She was on the brink of quitting, burnout, all the things.
Right.
So you can see change. But to answer your question, I would say twice a year at a minimum, so that it's just like that check-in and getting you rerouted.
Right. Well, we could talk for another hour. There's so much with the pro scan, and there's just so much goodness that Becca always has to offer. So we really could talk for a whole nother hour, but maybe I'll have you back on for like a part 2 edition or something. But yes, if you had the chance to talk to, this is kind of be our last question, all the mompreneurs of the world, just for a few minutes, what would you want them to know?
Well, the first thing that I want all mompreneurs to know is that who God created you to be is unique to you and only you. If you are passionate about building a business, if you're passionate about that, armor up. Be so careful at what you're listening to, where you're getting your information from, who's leading you, what you're paying attention to on social media, YouTube. You have to be so careful. And maybe perhaps a lot of mompreneurs are listening to this and they've just kind of flippantly read the books or listened to the things and done what they felt that they needed to do. And they're at the same place that they were when they started. Or maybe you're new in your journey and you're just getting into that. I just really, really want all mompreneurs to get so careful about how they grow. Be so careful. There's nothing worse than becoming who you were not created to become. And if you can learn this now, whether you've been in the journey for 2 years to 10 years to 20 years, or whether you're really new, you can always start today at being more careful at how you grow and where you devote your time and energy into ensuring that it nurtures who God created you to be. That's what I want all, not just mompreneurs, but just people in the personal and professional development space to hear. Because again, what's at stake? If you're not so careful at how you grow, you will become someone that God didn't create you to be. And there's nothing worse than that. And I just, if I can resurrect all of those women today and bring them back and get them rerouted in who God created them to be, then I'm doing what He created me to do, So just be careful. Just be careful.
Love that. So your Instagram, that's where you're on social media. What's your Instagram handle if they want to connect with you?
It's becca.owens.johnson.
Okay. And we'll put that in the show notes. And then your website is Rooted You.
Yep. So Rooted, ROOTEDYOU.com.
Okay.
And that's really the best place to go. And you can connect me through there, or email me there, DM me on Instagram. I will see that.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll put all those links in the show notes for you. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I did. I mean, I could talk to you for hours. You are so gifted and you have such a passion. I think that's what is just so contagious, is your passion to serve and your passion with your message. And he's turned your mess into a message, and you're reaching so many people and you're helping so many people. So if you haven't been encouraged today, let that be your encouragement. You've helped me, and I know the women that have listened. And I do have some men that listen to this podcast too, but I know they'll be so blessed by this episode. So thank you for being willing to share your time with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. It was a real honor.
This was awesome. All right, friends. Well, that's a wrap for this episode. I will be chatting with you later. I'm believing in you always, and you know that. Well, that's a wrap, friends, for this week's episode of the Mompreneur Life Remixed podcast. Thank you so much for listening and for following the show. It means so much to me. And listen, friend, sharing is caring. So if you loved this episode and thought of some fellow mompreneurs who could benefit, send them the link. Share this episode or take a screenshot and head on over to Instagram and share and tag me at Martine31Williams. We are connected on Instagram, right? It's where you will get all the fun behind the scenes of my life and business as a mompreneur. Until next time, know that I am believing in you always.